Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, December 18th, 2024, and today we're celebrating our 301st edition of the Midweek Roundup. Thanks to everybody who chimed in with their well wishes after last week's 300th episode. Really grateful for all the ongoing support I feel from my international education colleagues all around the world. And it's a great pleasure to be coming to you again this week to delve into three new questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. And as we do each week, we take our three questions from themes we see developing in our newsletter that comes out on Mondays. And that newsletter is called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. And in case you're wondering, SMIE stands for Social Media and International Education Consulting. That's the business. And been sending that out for over 6.5 years now. Bringing you the top stories of the week in both social media as they impact international education. That includes webinars, online tools, AI, social media tools, all of those, and evaluations of those tools. In news stories we see. And then we also cover the big stories international education-wise in the United States and then globally, and then solutions that we see developing that we can potentially leverage in what we do here in our work in international education. Now, there are two ways to subscribe to that newsletter, either via our website at smieconsulting.org/subscribe. Scroll down, you can hit the subscribe button, put in your details, and you'll get the email version of the newsletter in your inbox Monday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern. The other way to do that is subscribe via LinkedIn, and the LinkedIn version plus the email version both have together over 2,200 subscribers that are getting this news every Monday morning. LinkedIn comes out about 8:30. You'll get a notification each Monday morning at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time. That'll bring you the news stories of the day. So we see in the newsletter on Mondays themes developing around certain news stories or particular news stories that really jump off the page that we want to go into more in depth here on Wednesday. And then we cover those three questions we develop in the Midweek Roundup, a half hour of our thoughts on how these news stories, how these questions all can play into how we look at international education on our campuses, in our communities, in our country, and in perspective of the world at large. So today, we're going to start off with the first question: why do we need less expensive degree options? Now, we all know that the United States is the primary destination, the largest destination in terms of a destination for international students to pursue their higher education outside of their home country. It's been over 1 million for several years, and we've surpassed pre-pandemic levels now with a total number of international students with well over almost 1.1 million in the SEVIS Open Doors number, in the IIE Open Doors number. The SEVIS by the numbers, the real-time numbers by DHS, we're still waiting for a late 2024 edition of that. The last version of it we have is from May, when there was 1.15 million, I think. But so the numbers have rebounded fully since the pandemic and reached new all-time highs. So that is our situation here in the United States. Part of the reason our numbers keep growing is the pie of globally mobile students studying outside their home countries has also been rapidly growing. Project Atlas, which is coordinated by IIE, that tracks data from numerous different destination countries around the world, has been projecting a continued increase globally in the number of students that will be looking to study outside their home countries. But what we see developing is though there are more and more students, and some are saying there'll be 10 million students studying outside their home country by 2030, That is huge numbers. We're at 6 million now, I think. So that's a really significant expansion. But the questions that we often think is, are all international students created equal in terms of their preferred destinations, in terms of their ability to pay, in terms of where they're coming from? No, they're not. Every international student is different. And one of the reasons that, though the pie has been growing larger over recent last 2-3 decades, you see a problem with the the United States. If it's a problem, our share of that pie is decreasing. And in terms of what that pie looks like, it's now being made up of much more than the major players, US, UK, Australia, Canada. You see other players in mainland Europe, Germany, France, Italy, Finland, Sweden coming into the fore. China, for a while pre-pandemic, had risen up to number 3 or number 2 number of students choosing that country to study for their higher education. So we see regional hubs developing in Southeast Asia, and there's been a hub in the Gulf for a number of years since the early noughties. You've seen universities set up shop through transnational education, through homegrown universities looking to grow their reputation. India now growing in terms of universities that are setting up shop there for transnational education, but also Indian universities that are looking to become destinations for overseas students who are looking to study at the higher education levels. So the world has become increasingly competitive in terms of everybody wanting a piece of that pie. You see countries in East Asia that have turned to international education as a solution to economic challenges in terms of declining birth rates in their country. Sound familiar, US? To the skill shortages that they have in terms of their population of able to do certain jobs. Many countries in Korea, in Japan, in Taiwan are turning to international education as a way to solve economic problems in terms of skilled labor and making clear pathways from study to work. Failed experiment in Canada that went over the top with their study to work opportunities, mostly at the lower skill level vocational positions. So you see other countries like Thailand and Vietnam starting to attract international students from China. Hong Kong becoming a destination, a major destination for Chinese students, mainland Chinese students. Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia looking to become hubs for international students. So there's so many more competitors for the globally mobile students that are out there. Post-pandemic, we've seen some trends developing with students wanting to stay closer to home. And that means they might have looked at going to the US, UK, Canada, Australia before. Now they're looking to stay more regionally. That's what's driven a lot of Chinese students to Hong Kong and other Southeast Asian destinations. So why do we need less expensive degree options? This is actually coming out of an article from INTED last week. Their reflections on the Pi Live and the Open Doors data. That's they were on a presentation at Pi Live about that and what the data seemed to suggest. And a lot of what I've just shared is the foundation for why INTED's making this claim that we need less expensive degree options that we deliver through our college campuses or online or through third country options through TNE. So why do we need this? Because if we want to stay competitive, if we want to keep the revenue streams coming in, diverse revenue streams, not just diverse students where they're coming from, but diverse methods that students are receiving our education options, we need to have some less expensive options if we want to attract a broader swath of students to those degrees. And some of that might be for those that are really in the market for a third country experience coming to the United States. That may mean lower scholarships if you want to attract more of them, because it's, as I said, it's getting increasingly competitive. We're in a unique spot right now where because of stumblings in Australia, Canada, UK, the US is sticking out as primary destination that has the most room to grow and the best political advantages, I guess, in terms of a system that isn't changing much, that still offers and has improved the visa process, though it's still not nearly as good as some other countries in terms of the smoothness of the processing, the lack of a need for a visa interview in all the other major destination countries is something that will always hold us back, because it will consistently limit the amount of students that can take advantage of interviews in different countries, because they only have a certain number of hours a day that the consular officers, State Department employees, are able to do these interviews. Other countries that don't require in-person visa interviews have a much smoother process, or can have a much smoother process, because it eliminates a major hurdle, the visa interview, scheduling time to physically go to an embassy or consulate for an interview. We have that problem. Other countries don't. They have other problems of their own with their visa processing, oftentimes lengthy delays because they haven't staffed up enough to manage the paperwork processing. But for the biggest check for most international students coming to the United States comes in the security clearances that every student has to go through. There's a 10, 13 different lists that need to be checked and clearances that need to be achieved before a visa can be given, regardless of what happens in the visa interview. So we have extra hurdles for those who want to come to study in the United States. So having less expensive options on campus, that means more scholarships to stay competitive with what other countries are doing. That's important. So really good article from INTED on what the larger picture is, and that's something I always appreciate, is having that global perspective to know, hey, how are we competing globally for these same students that are not always going to be the same ability to pay full freight to come to our country for studies. So good article from INTED. I really appreciate what they do on a regular basis, and certainly I always am willing to shout them out here. Now, the second question of the day is one that has really been a sore spot for me since this past fall intake. And I learned this early on, being in India in country in August, doing some visits for UNLV. Fortunately, we aren't heavily dependent on India yet as a primary destination. It's a top 5 country for us, but not the primary one. We were hearing from all of our agent partners. We're hearing anecdotally from students on the ground, hey, we're being denied visas at a much higher rate than we have in the past. And that's the anecdotal stuff we heard on the ground in August. What the numbers are showing now for the main period, January to September, the end of the fiscal year basically, that this calendar year, 38% fewer Indian students were granted visas this year. Why is that? Demand certainly didn't decline. Demand has been up consistently for the last 4 or 5 years since the end of the pandemic. Basically 2021, 22, 23, and 24, the demand has been continuing to grow. This is the point now where we had over 103,000 visas awarded this past year, 63,000, I think, 64,000 visas less. 64,000 visas total awarded this year. So that's a 38% drop in the number of Indian student visas awarded. There are colleges I know well that I traveled with in August. I traveled with again over the course of the fall and saw at the AirC conference in Seattle a couple weeks ago and agent partners who were there as well bemoaned this significant drop in the amount of students that were receiving visas in India. What happened? And this is one of the most, the U.S. mission in India had been on a run since the pandemic of really phenomenal success. The U.S. ambassador had been former L.A. mayor, Los Angeles mayor, and had a very much a politician's mindset and public relations efforts to focus on improving the student visa issues and the process for students in India for going through that, and visas in general. They opened a new consulate in Hyderabad that had 65, 70 visa windows. The dirty little secret about those windows is they're never all open at once because they don't have the staff for them. So even though they have all these extra windows, they don't ever use them all at the same time, except maybe on these super Saturdays that they keep on having. They've had 4 of those this year. Those are great PR events. There was the effort during the pandemic to eliminate the in-person visa requirement for those that already have received a U.S. visa of any kind over the last 4 or 5 years, because whoever gets a U.S. visa, regardless of whether they've come for an interview or not, which all of them have had, unless they're in a visa waiver country, they've gone through all the security checks, whether it's a visitor visa, a work visa, a student visa. And if they've gotten a visa in the past 5 years, they've already gone through security checks, and that realization was a reason why the State Department said, let's waive the visa in-person requirement for a visa interview for anyone who's had a U.S. visa in the last 5 years. So that has helped. There's been more visa slots opened. There's been, in India specifically, they've had some efforts to get rid of the fraudulent agents that were basically booking visa appointments and then selling those appointments using fraudulent documents, selling those visa appointments to students that they might be advising or maybe just doing the visa advising for. There have been other moves to do these Super Saturdays to really help publicize, hey, we really want to do as much as we can. Those have all been great PR events, but the rubber hits the road when you see numbers like this and we see they failed this year, absolutely failed. What caused that? I guarantee you it's not a slowdown in growth or interest in the United States. What this is going to cause is a reduction in interest in the United States for this 2025 recruitment cycle. So the damage that has been done in the first 9 months of 2024 by the U.S. mission in India for a market that is so hypersensitive to any changes in visa policy or realities or perceptions of what's happening with visas, let alone all the work regulations, the H-1B and the OPT regulations that they hyper focus on, that you mess with that equilibrium and you start throwing in negatives here and there, it just tanks the market. So we've seen the U.S. get increasingly stiffer in terms of their requirements, that they gave 38% fewer visas this year to Indian students. That is shooting yourself in the foot as a country. It's almost as bad as what has happened with China, with COVID, with Canada with their overreach in terms of the public-private partnerships that flooded the country with students that already had master's degrees who were applying for 2 or 3 year vocational programs just to ease their path to residency. What's happened in Australia similarly with the cutbacks in Ministerial Directive 107. All of these things are self-inflicted wounds. We're doing that to our largest demographic of international students with what has happened this past year, with a 38% drop in Indian students receiving visas. That has consequences with what's happened with Canada-India relations over the last 2 years. That has had consequences far beyond just the political back and forth. It's affected demand. It's affected interest. It's affected ability to recruit students out of India for Canadian institutions, and all of the other larger problems that Canada is facing now as well. So how did this happen? It happened because the U.S. consular officers in India that had been doing so well the year before, and even during the pandemic, maybe they were cycling out and getting a whole bunch of new ones in. That happens every year. So the folks, for those aren't familiar, the folks that do the visa interviews are typically first and second posting new foreign service officers when they first get into the business. If they're coming to a country for the first time, the first thing they're going to be doing is visa interviews for 7-8 hours a day, and that comes with consequences. Why? After so much good work during the pandemic, the first 3 years, and coming out of the pandemic, where interest was going back up, we're seeing pent-up demand. We're seeing all this extra interest in the United States. We see Canada, Australia, UK restricting. We're still open for business for the most part, and we all of a sudden this fall saw this huge drop off. In the UK, they're dealing with 17-19% lower visa approval rate. This are accepted lower number of students getting visas to the UK. We're seeing 20+% drops in Australia, 20%, 25% drops in Canada, more in certain institutions. We're doing this 38% fewer in 1 year. 38% fewer students in our now largest market got visas. That's huge numbers. We were at 103,000 last year approved Indian student visas for January to September. We're only at 64,000 this year. We should have been 120, 130, maybe 120 would have been about right in terms of the upward trajectory of what our visa student population should be. So if you look at it, if we were at 120 from India this fall, the new students starting this fall, that would have been almost double what actually showed up in the United States this fall, new from India. That's a problem. That's a real problem that we have to address in our biggest market. It's not getting enough attention. It needs to. In the United States, we're getting all these other stories coming out of India, and then I'll be sharing the links there, but we're not hearing enough about it here. In some of the inner circles, ARC, NAFSA, U.S. for Success Coalition is starting to hear attention being paid on the visa rates. We certainly heard a lot about visa denial rates in Africa this past summer, but are we hearing the same urgency in India, our largest market? We're not, but we should be. So let's move on to our final question of the day. Now, this is a question that does hit home for me personally because it's coming out of a news story that my current institution, UNLV, is at the center of. We at UNLV have, over the last 3 or 4 years, certainly even before the pandemic, we're thinking about it. Our provost had the idea to, because of conversations he'd had with industry leaders in Las Vegas that had wanted or needing more folks who had employees that had Chinese language ability. Why? Because they would be getting all this equipment that they would need for their businesses, whether it's slot machines for the casinos, whether it's all these other tools, machine tools, manufacturing tools, whatever it was that were made in China. That now needed, the manuals were all in Chinese. They needed people to come and interpret these manuals. So this was an initial concern. And this is happening at UNLV, obviously in Las Vegas. We have a lot of a very diverse industry base in the city, not just the casinos and the hotels and the resorts and all that, but serious entertainment, technology. There's been a huge tech boom in southern Nevada in the last dozen years or so, as California has become increasingly expensive. Nevada doesn't have a state income tax. A lot of businesses have opened up shop in southern Nevada, primarily in Las Vegas. So there's been huge growth in businesses and engineering firms and tech firms, in addition to our obviously entertainment-based, sports-based economies that are driving our growth as a city. But the Chinese language piece is certainly popped in. And this is all with the backdrop, and you want to talk going against the grain of what's happened with Chinese language programs in the United States over the last dozen years. The question that we're answering here is, will Chinese language programs survive Trump 2.0? There's, with the China initiative that was launched during the first Trump administration, talk of it coming back, but probably not, some different version of it, trade war with China, all these other things that are building up. You would think that there won't be much future for Chinese language programs in the U.S., but at UNLV, we are opening one in the new year, and it's going to be called the SANS Institute for Chinese Language and Culture. Now, SANS is one of the major casino hotel chains in Las Vegas. It also exists globally. And they're one of the driving forces, a $15 million donation from that company to set up this institute that will bring in faculty that we will be paying through this funding raised by SANS to this program. Funding that we will pay for the instruction. We will have full autonomy over the institute itself. It's going to be one of our many research institutes and centers at UNLV as an R1 institution. This is going to open the doors to a lot of other opportunities for some of our Chinese partners, particularly Sun Yat-sen University, to help provide a lot of the staff that we would have to teach the courses in the SANS Institute. And it's really goes completely against what's happened with Chinese language programs in the United States since the pandemic. Even before the pandemic, we're starting to see the Confucius Institutes start to close, and there's maybe only a handful of what used to be 30, 40 programs in the United States, and only a handful less left, and most of them are in the process of closing down. And there's been bills passed that would restrict funding to institutions that relied on funding from China in any form to have a Confucius Institute. And so no new Confucius Institutes have been founded. There have been restrictions. Department of Defense has had restrictions, Department of Education in terms of aid that funding from military sources that were connected to funding other programs at your institution. If you had Chinese sources of funding directly, that would prohibit you getting those funding sources. That would have threatened veterans programs, financial aid for other things, that for domestic students if universities ran afoul. There was a waiver process that institutions could apply for. No one ever applied for that to be able to get this kind of agreement to open a new Chinese language and culture center. We're able to do this because it's relying solely on U.S. money to run and open our own center. So it's not going to, I haven't seen any mention of it in the national press yet. I'm surprised folks like Karen Fisher haven't picked up on this yet, and other outlets like Inside Higher Ed. Hopefully they will and see that, hey, talk about, and UNLV, our nickname are the Running Rebels. That is totally going counter to what the trends are. As rebels, that's what we do. We make it happen. And this is something that we've built, that we're in the process of building. So can we survive this kind of a new program? I hope so, because there's really a need, and it's a way to help bridge the gap between our two countries through having these kinds of interchanges that aren't politically tied to money and the threats of sanction and all of these other things. This is an opportunity for us as an institution to really open up doors for the future collaboration between Chinese people and the United States, and increase goodwill, helping to demystify the Chinese language and culture to residents of Las Vegas, to students at UNLV who would be taking advantage of this and beneficiaries of this program. So we're really excited about this. We're also excited about a totally unrelated announcement last week it wasn't actually last week, it's probably in November, but the State Department, they don't usually make big news when they do these things, but China has been on the State Department list, so level 3 travel advisory, which means reconsider travel to those countries. I've traveled to level 3 countries. I traveled to China when it was a level 3 country in June of 23. But that level of travel restrictions from the State Department often guides institutional policy, particularly if you have students that might be wanting to study abroad there. That unless they sign waivers and go through a very complex legal mix, they can't go to those countries. And some institutions outright ban students or faculty going to level 3 countries for whatever purpose. This in November 27th, they changed the advisory from a level 3 down to a level 2, which means exercise increased caution. So they've made it easier to travel, or they're saying there's less challenges for traveling to mainland China, Hong Kong, and Macau. Are the three affected areas by this travel advisory. So it's good news if you've had study abroad programs that have been dormant since COVID, before COVID, that are now maybe able to go again because China's now in a level 2 instead of a level 3 country. So that's another bit of good news that might be coming at just the right time to now allow us. We're going to be sending a group of students there next summer to one of our other partners, Beijing Normal University, maybe some other events going on with some of our other new partners in China. So this is something that we're treating as good news at UNLV. So can they survive Trump 2.0? We'll see what the actual new regulations or executive orders that come down actually, how that will actually impact travel and relationships. Hopefully we don't have a global ban like Florida has, like public universities in Florida and public universities now in Texas have on any kind of relationships with China. Travel to China not allowed under these state laws. We hope we don't get any of that nationally. I think we're fortunate in Nevada. We're in even though it went red in the fall elections, it tends to be a fairly purple state, and certainly where we are in Las Vegas tends to be a more blue part of the state. But the good news is some regulations are changing that allow travel there more easily, and what we're doing on our own, building our own Chinese Language and Culture Institute with U.S. funds, is really going to allow us to do some creative things in the coming months and years. So we're really looking forward to taking that forward. So that's all we have for you this week on the Midweek Roundup. I want to thank you again for making the Roundup part of your weekly international edification, and we look forward to chatting with you in the weeks and months to come. Cheers.